Good morning, dear people. And it's coming up to March. Who'd have thought it? March already. But there you go. And less of this flim flam. We have a very interesting talk for you today. Patsy and George are going to lead us in a discussion which I think will be most interesting. In fact, I will let them tell us what they're up to, save for me going on and on and on. Patsy and George, it is up to you.
Hello. I just thought I'd introduce myself first of all as saying that I'm coming as a sort of unqualified observer. My superpower is that I'm ill a lot of the time, unable to do much, and therefore I probably have more time to trawl social media than people that are much more gainfully employed. And so I just wanted to start with a brief history of just what I've noticed over the last 10 years. And I first started noticing I was a bit better 10 years ago and I played in a reggae band and I was getting a lot of social media posts from my black colleagues and I noticed that they were being targeted by and sharing because it appealed to them in some ways because of their own hardships. They were definitely getting targeted by posts that were set to put black people against Jewish people. So these posts would have no mention of how much Jewish people had done in the civil rights in America, for instance, but everything about how their wealth and everything was being diminished by the Jewish middle class now. And I thought that's a bit weird. And I think what's going on here is that they're trying to avoid people looking at the injustices that capitalism brings up. So it's much easier to package it up as an enemy there and distract people. So I feel a lot of these posts are designed like a thief saying, "Stop thief," so that the crowd chase after a different person while they can get on with their business, burgling the house. And this was confirmed for me when I went to the Anarchist Book Fair in Bristol in 2016, and they had to hold a special workshop for conspiracy theories because they found that every little single tree protest, or bypass extension in their sort of working group of the most sort of dedicated 5 or 6 people, there'd be somebody that had been radicalized by this New World Order stuff and was blaming everything on the New World Order. And then I really noticed it when the drummer of our band, she lived in a houseboat on the river, and so she didn't have a TV, so she didn't have any mainstream media. And each evening she was watching YouTube. And she started being interested in why the Twin Towers fell, which I can understand. I was ill watching it. They went down very neatly. But within 2 months of watching conspiracy theories on the Twin Towers, she went to being a Holocaust denier who believed that Trump was a good guy, all Democrats were paedophiles, and global warming was, did not exist. Now, I'm talking about somebody that was educated to A levels. She was a nursing sister, and the only difference really in education between her and me was that she probably hadn't been very much interested in politics, so she was politically naive, and she had an interest in natural health, which I do too. Um, and then when COVID started, she was so convinced, so wanting to convince me that COVID didn't exist, that she was sending me masses of videos about how COVID was all a conspiracy. And what I noticed is that when I researched the funding of where she was getting her information from, it was sort of from far right, business funded. Presumably, their motive is they wanted to sort out their shopping and didn't want anything like lockdowns. So they were producing masses of fake data about how COVID didn't exist. And this was happening at a very high level. I mean, there was one, I can't remember her name, but there was somebody that had worked in government in America, quite high up in the Bush administration, and she had been responsible for head of all the public private finance initiatives in transport and housing in New York. And she gave an hour-long video. They always bore you into submission, these videos. And the first half hour of it, I could agree with everything it said. It was all about the problems of if we go into a cashless society, which I could agree with a lot. And then at the half-hour mark, she suddenly announced that how the vaccines all contained chips, control chips. And I thought, this is extraordinary because, yes, in theory, I know that in espionage and stuff, they can do stuff like that. But she's an economist, and it is not economically viable to chip the entire population. You wouldn't be able to have the resources to process all the information you get from them. So she knows she's lying, but she's high up, and she's decided that we want to make sure that Trump gets in. So I'm going to paint, COVID as all a socialist government conspiracy to control you all, because this is what they were doing in their. I noticed in a lot of these anti-COVID measure videos, um, they do the sort of 3 or 4 truths and a lie. So they'd say things that got people thinking they know their stuff. Quite often they only knew their stuff because they were watching mainstream media, which they weren't allowing their devotees to watch. So they'd say something like, and mark my words, there will be a lockdown within the next week. And I thought, yeah, it was announced on the BBC News, but the debaters didn't know that. So they think, oh my God, David Icke is a god. He knows this stuff. He sees it. So, but under all of these, there was always a message halfway along the line that even caring about being socially responsible was a denial of your freedoms. If you care about your disabled neighbour, if you wear a mask because you're wearing a mask for other people, you've been got at. I think it was blue pills. You're towing the line. You're a sheep. All caring about other citizens is just a device to rob you of your freedom. And buried in these videos was also a message that all socialism is communist government control. So where it was placed, it was obviously deliberate. The people sharing a lot of this weren't deliberate. They might have been natural helpers that it fed into their wishes that if you just did everything right, you wouldn't need to get COVID. And actually, we don't need to be in lockdown. We could all be free and nothing wrong would happen. It's sort of anybody that was disgruntled with any COVID measures, this was aimed to kind of radicalize them against any form of socialism. And that's why it was so obvious that it wasn't just that sharing it, might have been sharing it innocently. It wasn't innocent at its core. And I mean, other things, for instance, I noticed. Was it Philip Schofield who was doing that daytime TV program? And you're probably far too highbrow to watch daytime TV, but it was quite what they'd call now a woke program. They'd always interview people that the anti-woke brigade don't want interviewed. And I noticed that GB News had on their site 200 anti-Philip Schofield videos. So that's the level that this sort of drip, 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 drip of, we'll plant a station, make it look quite innocent, and then we'll just drip people with info that's, unfortunately for us, I think in a few years' time, is going to be harvested. And just let me have a look at my notes again. Yeah, I mean, we're in a situation now. I mean, when I said to Patsy, I don't mind leading this discussion, Trump hadn't even started his second term. And now we find out that a lot of the people influencing Trump's team don't actually believe in democracy at all. I mean, Musk has gone on record as saying empathy is the downfall of Western civilization. And I was also stressed to see in my feed how the Christian nationalists, which now could be called Christo-fascists, are actually publishing books saying the toxicity of empathy. That, I saw a talk given by a sort of, right-wing church minister in America saying, like how empathy is the devil's tool to trick you into not following the Old Testament or whatever. They don't seem to have read the New Testament. And they're hammering home this message of empathy as toxicity and it's a trick and the devil's delusion. I noticed while watching Trump's election speeches the first time he was in, that he recited this poem called The Viper. Are any of you familiar with The Viper? No. Yeah, it's basically a poem where this foolish woman gives a viper a drink of water, takes pity on it, and gives the viper a drink of water. And then, of course, the viper turns around and poisons the woman and her family. And in Trump's speeches, it was very much aimed at immigrants, socialists, and women, people that either showed empathy or people that wanted empathy as being vipers. And I see also that they're funding a lot of the right wing in other countries. Like Musk, when in Brazil they had an election, Musk suddenly stepped in and gregariously announced he was going to give free Wi-Fi access to a lot of the population. Of course, he took over Twitter just before that. And Steve Bannon has also been implicated in a lot of the European elections and funding things. And some of they are so far right that in Breitbart, his publication, he even published articles by men saying that rape was the natural order of things. There's no such thing as rape. Taking women is the natural order and men's, you know, right, which is, I suppose, why now they've been quite sympathetic. The Tate brothers. And I continually see on social media at the moment, I make a point of I don't block anybody that doesn't have the same views as me. Therefore, I can see what the other side are saying a bit more than if I was just staying in my own echo chamber. And the repeated message at the moment is Keir Starmer in a Nazi uniform and all tax is theft, you know. So obviously, with the all taxes theft message and Keir in a Nazi uniform, every time the taxes are raised or anything goes on, this feeds into their narrative. And of course, Musk agreed to give the Reform Party $1 million. I think he's fallen out a bit with Farage because Farage isn't far right enough for him. But I think what I'm trying to emphasize is that it's not just differences of opinion. It's not just the usual thing. I mean, when I grew up, you'd have right wing people and you'd have left wing people, and they'd actually talk to each other and hold debates. But with the internet, what I'm noticing is that people are getting one side of the argument en masse, like 50 videos a day, all pressing one message from whatever standpoint they're in. And I know that if I take it back 10 years to the people around St Paul's and Montpellier that might have been at a little demo to stop the council shutting, I don't know, shutting a day centre for the elderly or disabled. If I look at the group of people that were on a demo then, I would say only about a fifth of them now would be on a demo. The other four-fifths have all been radicalised against anything to do with the Labour Party. And I'm not saying that everybody should be a Labour Party supporter and no other politics count, but what I'm noticing is how quickly things are changing to people only listening in their own echo chambers. And I think the left are a bit more naive about how much money and big business is putting into changing things in a really dramatic way. I mean, yeah, in America, a lot of people behind that government have said they don't believe in democracy, and we are in scary times because most young people have been radicalized into thinking that anything like the BBC News is all lies. They won't touch, they proudly say they won't touch mainstream media. And they don't seem to realise that for all its faults, you can normally tell the bias of a mainstream media article. And if it says outrageous lies, people can be taken to task. But if they're just watching their Telegraph, which is one of the platforms they use, or God help us, Truth Social, or something like that, they're speaking to people that are already inclined to believe them. And there are no checks and balances. They can literally say anything they like, and nobody's going to take them to task for that. And the worry is that is how, apart from our generation and older, the generation a bit below us are too busy to have time to do anything other than try and earn enough to pay off the mortgage. And the ones younger than them are only watching sort of radicalized media from a point of view which they've drifted through, maybe for good points, like they believe in natural health, or also everything's a mixture. You know, there will be wrong and right on both sides. I mean, as somebody who's non-binary, I watched the debate about transsexuals, and the extremes on either side have made it so difficult for anybody else to discuss anything. You know, you either believe that trans people are 100% women and nothing else counts for anything else, and I'm quite happy for trans people, but I do think under capitalism, when you've only got one toilet in a one horse coach station at 2 a.m. in the morning, and they can say, oh, we only need to provide one toilet, then I think women will be more at risk. And I wish the trans community would accept that there are some areas where, not from the trans people, but from predatory men, um, uh, predatory men abusing the system, there are dangers, but they won't. They'll only stick to their course. And then other people that have been long friends of mine will trans people as total nonsense. They don't exist. Intersex doesn't exist. It's so rare. And both are, you know, the truth. And most of the majority of the population could find a sort of a working a working middle way between all of that that respected everybody's needs and wants. But the argument has been hijacked by the extremes on both sides, and neither side are listening to each other. So even when it's not from sort of a political manipulation like it is with party politics, even when it's on other things, other issues, I think social media's polarization of people into thought ghettos is it's just really changing the way things are dealt with. Anyway, just for the record, I don't go either side on that debate. I can see areas in that trans debate where I'm 100% behind the trans, and actually I have to admit the feminists have got some point on the other side. But this is reality, you know. There will be truth on both sides, but if you've only got each side only listening to their own side, Lord help us. Anyway, I think that's throwing that all into the mix.
Which way?
We
I
just
can't
have to
get
put our heads
I
to it,
can't
yeah.
get the hang of the screen.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I think you're muted. Everybody else is muted. Have you muted everybody else?
No, I'm not able to do that. They can do it themselves.
We're both on the same mic.
Yes, I cough quite a lot sometimes, so I don't want you to hear me coughing away while you're speaking. Anyway, yeah. One thing which I think you haven't mentioned is within England today, the published press is totally right wing.
Yeah.
There is no company, no company like the Express, the Mail, and other newspapers are all owned by people who live abroad, with, I think, to give them the exception of the Guardian, which is not doing as much as it used to do within politics. It used to be, as that phrase goes, a good paper, but it has drifted a little since then. My father used to say that. My father and my family used to get the Daily Mirror, radical left-wing newspaper, which we used to read quite often. But that, since it's been sold to another thing, has become mild turned.
Yeah.
And less, I remember the days of people like John Pilger, who produced some of the most investigating and groundbreaking stuff of its day. Not today, folks. I think that's my point in that type of thing. That if you take people like Rothermere, who lives in Monaco and has one of the worst right-wing papers, the Daily Mail, which is something like that. If you changed a few letters and said MAIL or now MALE, it says something for it.
Ray,
Yes. Yes.
who
Yes,
lives in Monaco? I couldn't hear that.
Lord Rothermere. He owns the Daily Mail. He inherited it from his father.
Okay.
If you remember back in history, the Daily Mail had a thing, I think it was 1938 or something like that, a front page thing which said, "Hurrah for the brown shirts." Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obvious and it's got worse. I think I was concentrating on the social media because I don't think the younger generation pick up a paper a lot. Yes, university people might pick up, but the vast majority of voters now, I don't even think they pick up the newspaper in the newspaper stand. And within sort of 3 years' time, when it comes to the next election, I think newspapers will have much less influence than the media platforms. So it's always been there. I mean, even in the history times, as soon as the print was there, the equivalent of what I'm saying now was cartoons, wasn't there? They used to stir up a lot of feeling with cartoons. So it has always been there. I mean, I spent most of my childhood thinking, how on earth did they vote for Hitler? And now we're seeing the same. You tell people they're great, they're not the problem, somebody else is the problem, which is music to their ears, and then get them to blame other people, and it's happening again.
Yeah.
I think it's difficult and quite dangerous to generalize. I have a 30-year-old grandson, and his sister's 27, and their cousin's 28. They're educated. I do not recognize any statement you've made about the young people, their generation, as applying to them and their educated, thoughtful, intelligent 20 to 30 years old. Generalizations and conspiracy theories, in my opinion, we all love a conspiracy theory. If I could just be personal, I was living in New York in November, I think it was 1962. My then husband walked through the door and I thought, oh my God, he's lost his job. And he said, you'll never guess what, Kennedy's been assassinated. And that moment, I already knew, that we share a language with America, but we are a different country and they have power and we don't. But I think conspiracy theories and I think social media needs some kind of control because that it tells lies. And one of the worst liars is that Musk fellow, followed closely by that Trump fellow. And I use deliberately insulting language. No doubt they're intelligent, but yeah, I could rant on, but I won't.
It's very good to, obviously, the reason why I talk about it is because when we are in more, I don't know, in Bristol, I think we can get, I mean, look, most of the people in Bristol thought that Brexit wasn't going to happen. But I knew that Brexit was going to happen because every time I went out into the country to visit my mother, I heard the conversations that were going on there. So what I've said in my talk is aimed at people really that are in bubbles where we don't meet this sort of thing, just to emphasize how prevalent it is out there. Because when we're surrounded by like-minded people, we don't realize the speed at which it's accelerating.
Yep. I know somebody who thinks Trump's a good deal because he's working on behalf of the American people and that it's quite sensible to decrease the immigrants and all the things that every time he thinks these actions are, in quotes, quite good for the American people. And it's not just Trump. He thinks the other people who we would think of as bad for their country, he thinks they're quite good for their country because of the way they're running it. And then this line about the survey that I saw about young people thinking that countries would be better off run not as democracies.
Mm.
I was completely shocked. I thought, where are you getting your information from, people?
Yeah, I think I found out that a lot of the people in the American government are following a guy called Curtis Yarvin.
Could you say that name again?
Curtis,
Curtis, C-U-R-T-I-S.
Yarvin, Y-A-R-V-I-N. And he's I suppose he's a current day philosopher out of Silicon Valley. And yeah, he very much thinks that democracy needs to be replaced by a techno monarchy, I think he called it.
What kind of monarchy?
A techno monarchy.
Oh, techno, not.
I think their thinking is that we are the intelligent people. We know how to run things, and other people are built to be slaves, sort of thing. So they see themselves as the current day kings and queens of the past, with the serfs working for them. He's not quite so right wing on some things as some of the others. He's a bit more liberal about things like gender. But yeah, definitely there's a whole philosophy behind, democracy is yesterday's failure.
Can I just ask you some more things?
Yeah.
Other people might want to talk as well. Oh, hello, Gordon. Did Gordon have hand up before me? Then go on.
I've been sitting on my hands, really. We like to think we are a democracy. The Greeks, who invented democracy, would look at us and say, we are not. We are an oligarchy, elected oligarchy.
Yeah.
That, I think, for me, the most democratic thing that happened for a long time in this country was the Brexit vote, where we all contributed. And a lot of people could not stand the result. And my own personal reasons for this were for voting for Brexit, and I've never regretted it, is that I knew what things were like in the North Country. I'm from
Mm.
there, and you only have to go to almost any of the towns, and there were a Great Depression, and um, the Greeks who invented democracy just wouldn't recognize us now, and it's a worth really worth study how the Greeks actually came about to invent it. It was very difficult, and what it was like to be there, where as a represented as a citizen, once you defined your citizens, of course, but as a citizen, you could take part in any debate that was going, and the most startling results came there. I remember there's one case where Athens, who developed its own little empire, um, had one of its subject islands rebelling. So the ecclesia got together, the government, and how it was managed is very important, but the government got together and decided the best thing to do to make sure it didn't happen elsewhere was to send a boat with instructions to cut off the right hands of all the men. And off the boat went very slowly. A lot of people regretted this, but in the meantime, um, other people got together and came back and insisted on debate the next day and reversed the decision. And they sent off a much faster boat to go and make sure that it never took place. It's quite remarkable that they were able to change their minds and act on it because they were a democracy. We are not a democracy, nor is still less America. And the more you go higher you go to manage the area, the further away you get from the individual. That you just don't have the kind of belief that you thought you had. You've just been sent by a worthy Remainer who's worried about my state of mind on this matter, a book called How They Broke Britain. And it's a collection, it's a very well written, a collection of character studies of all the people involved in that process. Um, uh, and the man clearly couldn't believe how this had come about, but it was due to all these misplaced characters. What he really should have concentrated on was the fact that 60 years ago, the character of our MPs seems to be totally different. They could respect, well, the classic case is the Perfumer case, where Macmillan couldn't believe that somebody had lied to him and sacked him immediately. No, and everybody sort of took it for granted. The real question is what's happened between then and now that you can forget that kind of behavior. Um, the well, I was going to say something more, but it's worth going back to the way the Greeks actually did this. As a citizen, everything was decided by lot. As a citizen, you could be chosen to represent the administrative part of the government, or not. Um, Even the military commanders, there was always one very good one who was kept in place, but even the military commanders don't appear in the overall supervision of the democracy. And clearly it seems to me that it only works at that level in small areas. America does have the advantage of delegating a lot of responsibility to individual states, so that they can be um, more independent. Um, but it's something we've got to, I think, address. We're clearly employing um, for our MPs people who are not really worth the job. You wonder where they've all gone, and of course, I mean, the answer is the EU, where anybody who had any real ambition shot off to spend a good life in Bruges or wherever. And my MP was some character I'd never heard of, living miles away, and if I had anything to say, it would just get lost in the administration. Anyway, I've gone too long, so I'll leave that for us. So,
I, I, I sometimes wish we could do away with political parties altogether and just have local representatives that then could work for the good of the country. But there's lots of complications with that. What you said about the change, I felt it was an unintended consequence of the Thatcher era. I don't think she realised that sort of it's one thing to have capitalism balanced by people by a strong ethic in other ways. I mean, whatever you think about the Christian church and other churches, having business, having free business in the era when most people were taught each Sunday, you mustn't lie, is completely different from what was happening in the 80s when business culture took over and it became completely acceptable to lie. You filled in your CVs. I mean, when I was a child filling in a CV, it would never occur to you to tell a porky. But nowadays, people think it's completely normal to sell yourself. It would be, you've got to sell yourself. You've got to, and we've lost the roots of having basic truth, and ambition is considered more worthy characteristic than honesty, I think, and that's affected politicians a lot.
I did preparation for this, thinking about democracy, and I came across a really interesting piece to me, which many would think of as impossibly idealistic when described. And it's by in a book called The Lemurian Scrolls, and it's talking about how we would govern ourselves in an advanced civilization, one where consciousness was higher for pretty much everybody. And it describes very well all the alternatives, plutocracies, autocracies, oligarchies, even and including what it calls state terrorism, which is, of course, what Russia is, and what America seems to be aspiring to at the moment. But it's certainly not everybody, and we do have in consensualocracy, which this is recommending, it's very familiar to and recognizable to Quakers, because it's a form of consensualocracy. Is, when you read about it, it's true democracy. It's not representative democracy. It's participative democracy. And it's participative democracy to the point where people are trying to work towards something that is acceptable to everybody, right? Once we get 51%, that's it. And I will say this, by the way, for my MEP, Molly Scott Cato was incredibly accessible. And so it wasn't just that we had these big areas and that we had, what was it, that sort of represent, it was, I forget what the system's called now, but you were electing more than one representative, so that there was a possibility if even a party with a minority could still get a representative, rather than it's the first past the post system. And Molly did a really great job of finding ways to engage with the community, which a lot of MPs don't do. Once you're elected, you're off up there, and you're actively engaged in engaging your community. And so consensualocracy is about everybody participating, and is a little bit what Extinction Rebellion was aiming for in being beyond politics, because it actually wanted to bring in citizens' assemblies so that difficult issues could be debated by a fair cross-section of the population with good information, well informed as well at the same time. And it would be very easy for the conversation that we've been having today to sort of stick on a level of horror at what we appear to be walking into at the moment. And I almost feel wary of introducing what sounds like an impossibly utopian idea when things are so awful at the moment. So then you have to look for, is there a light at the end of the tunnel? Is something going on? And it's just possible that Germany only recoiled from Nazism after it had been given a very strong punch in the head by the rest of the world. And there was still a big remnant left over. Communism and Stalinism took over a whole lot of Eastern Europe and put people in chains for a whole generation, a generation and a half, perhaps. The question is, can we experience what we're experiencing now and recoil from that before it gets completely overboard? And it's worth noting that what's happening at the moment is happening as a result of positions taken by this incredibly privileged and rich minority.
Exactly.
A high-tech minority who are taking advantage of technology that was introduced. So the social media and everything that we have allowed everybody to participate in communication. And it's been hijacked by well-paid experts. And there is the possibility to use the same technology to introduce participative democracy. If we were to back off from the toxic, I'll finish on this point. One piece I read very recently was a sweet piece from I think a university president or a high politician in a address to graduating students. And he was saying that it's natural to look very carefully at something that you don't recognize. It's wired into evolution. Our evolutionary wiring is to reject something that's different because that's going to save you from a tiger in the jungle or whatever. And in order to create a cooperative civilization, you have to unlearn some basic programming and put in a higher level that leads to a cooperative society. But what you've unlearned is very easy to trigger and bring back in. And that's what's happening at the moment. And I think, we need to relearn. It's so easy to trigger, we know what the names of the chemicals, the endorphins and so on, that are triggered when you get people into addictive states on social media. And the AIs that run the social media are doing that. But now we've all got AIs, and these AIs are their basic programming is around what can I do to help the person who I interact with. And instead of half a dozen AIs controlling the social media, you're going to have 6 billion AIs advising people what's the best that humanity has to offer for you. And that's so far from being guaranteed that it's not true. It's one possible at the moment. So it's at the moment there are hopeful scenarios even though things look really desperate right now.
Mm.
And there's absolutely no guarantee that the hopeful scenarios will emerge. But the one thing that will help the other scenarios triumph is if we live in fear and we don't cooperate.
Mm.
Just to leave you with an image, if you go down to Perrow's Bridge at the harbour, and I sent this photo to a friend. I was touched and moved. There's been some sort of roadworks set up around one of the trees there at the Arnolfini side of Perrow's Bridge. And what they've done is they've dug the cobblestones have all been kicked out of place by the tree roots, and the area's sort of quite horrible.
Dangerous.
Yeah, and this one that's been worked on has been completely beautified. The cobbles have been taken out and reset, and a little thing put around the bottom of the tree, and it's just the most thoughtful. It probably cost thousands of pounds to do it, but it's taking care of a piece of our built environment and showing that we can take care and make things look lovely. And the next tree along is the sort of before picture. I hope that they're going to do all the trees. But I sent this to a friend in Germany, and they said they got it, that it was beautiful, that we were taking care of something spiritual in our environment, a tree. And if we can come back to that, we might just have a chance.
I
May
think
I?
fear. Oh, sorry. Right.
Carry on, Patsy.
I think the fear factor is absolutely vile, and you're so right. Living in fear, and people are living in fear of being poor and living in fear of all sorts of things. I mean, in our country, I would say that we have a low level of fear in general, but it's the fear is felt more by people who are more vulnerable.
I wouldn't accept your generalization about fear. Women have far more reasons to fear than men do. And I think a lot of the issues, when we generalize, we need to actually think of women and women's rights separately from male rights, because women are much more vulnerable than men.
I think that's a good point. I think, yeah, and I think, I mean, it's an actual real point, but also it's a point which is being, sorry, I don't mean to be the dirge monger in this, but I think it's also being manipulated by the far right as well. So they can make women more scared of immigrants and things like that, and play on it, and more scared of wokeness because it means men in our toilets. And what I notice is the far right are very good at picking issues which they can amplify and then manipulate and use. And it's very difficult because often, like with the Brexit thing, the left thought, oh, it's all a load of codswallop. But actually, up north, some people were, it was much easier for people to pay people coming over to do some of the jobs than it was to pay a wage that was going to, be able to rent a house and council tax for the population here. So a lot of the fears that are amplified are real fears. I think that's what I'm trying to say. And then those people can often feel the only people that are listening to them are the far right. I've seen feminist friends of mine, some of them turn to the far right. One even supports Trump because their fear about straight men pretending to be women in toilets was sort of full face in their, that was what they're frightened of. And they didn't realise that actually, Trump and that aren't for them either. But the manipulation of fear is a real thing. And my only hope, to go back to what David was saying, that actually the experiment in America will fall flat on its face and give the human population a breathing space to not go hurtling down the same direction. And I mean, things what you were saying, David, are so valuable. It's so important to be planting those seeds of positivity and thought of how things can be different, even in front of the bulldozer that's coming to plough them down. The seed can survive in the upturned soil and flourish. It's so important to keep planting those seeds and keep on watering them.
One of the big reasons for the Trumpian rise happened quite a few years ago, which people didn't recognize as happening, is that in a lot of states, the right-wing brigade were starting to start small. They got themselves elected into school boards, into local council places. And it was this kind of creeping thing, which they started to do this. And if you can do that in your child's elementary school in America, you have many representatives on the right who did it rather quietly, and people didn't notice it so much. But when you start banning books because they don't agree to your agenda, and you get it past them, and lots more councils started to do it. And that was when you had the incremental rise of people of Trumpian ideas, because they started small and they gathered in them the small plains people, you know, the kind of, as Americans call them, the mum and pop shops, you know, who had been going on for years and years and years happily. Then suddenly these ideas started to appear. And that's the insidious nastiness which has slowly kind of nearly crept out of the cupboard, to use another aphorism, you know, in that sense. And that is where you got it from. And that is where the well class, as the ordinary people, need to take back control of these places, so that in schools sometimes now you cannot debate religion and anti-religion, because the religious right has now captured your school and does things kind of like Darwin was wrong, and all things like that, which percolate over the years. The nastiest thing, of course, was the Roe versus Wade type of thing, you know, which now means that in a lot of states in America, you can't get an abortion. Not at all. Not even if you're raped can you have that fetus aborted, because that has gone from the small up into higher government.
Yeah, government.
That is the nasty, insidious, nothing to do with internets and things like that. It's to do with really grassroots stuff, which is now become.
I think one of the latest edicts last week that came out of Trump was I can't remember the wording, but it was a site where you could report your teacher. If you felt your teachers weren't sticking to the Trumpian agenda, they could be reported. And how these sort of executive orders are translated by an already brainwashed population. I mean, a woman with short hair, no tattoos, but with short hair, was removed from a ladies' toilet by armed police. She was a woman, but somebody had said, "Oh, is that a woman in the toilet? We'll get the police straight away." I know trans friends of mine that are actually leaving America because they no longer feel safe, because even though they felt safe enough to go into their corner store and buy their supplies, they now realise that if a few of the people in that town don't like them, it's growing and more people are. It's sort of giving permission for anybody that's got slight doubt just to join in with it. Hey, look at them, and it's terrifying how these things are being translated at the grassroots level by the spade work that you're referring to that has been done in France.
Mm. If you want to know what happens in that type of thing, read the history of East Germany and the Stasi and other people like that. Really, really nasty things happen when you're not watching.
Yeah.
Someone once quoted to continue democracy, we need constant vigilance.
Yeah.
Sorry for me rambling on again, folks.
No, it's so relevant. I feel that there's an element of people whose hearts are more in our place are quite busy because there's so many things to be concerned about. And, in the same way as hate is easier than love sometimes, it's thinner, it's a trajectory, it's like a salted crisp as compared to a baked potato. It's less nourishing, but there's an immediate appeal, if you see what I mean. And I feel that they are a lot better organised, but they've got lesser vision. So but sometimes when you've got greater vision, it's harder to organise, if you see what I mean. So, yeah, I suppose there's always a hope that a lot of the people of that persuasion are also egotistical, that they all fight amongst themselves. Another area for hope, I guess.
David.
Yeah. You mentioned the Stasi. One of my favorite films of all time is the Lives of Others. I don't know if any of you have seen it, and it's about it's a wonderful story of the Stasi following a playwright and tracking him, and a sort of renegade Stasi operative masking the spying on this guy so that his work would be able to live. And it's from just before the fall of the wall, and so there's a sort of there's an afterpiece in I can't quite remember it. It's something like the guy who had helped this playwright, the playwright has no idea who it was, but he goes into a shop and finds a book written by the author, by the playwright, and the playwright is thanking this anonymous person for allowing him to not be arrested during the repressive era. And so, it's a wonderful film of, compassion and people doing the right thing when the whole society is against it. And I like to think that in America and in the West, there's a good quantity of people who just operate from proper moral principles. There's another example that's just hit. I've got friends who are being outraged that Keir Starmer is breaking up the NHS and breaking up, NHS England. And I'm thinking, hang on, don't you remember what Starmer is getting rid of is what the Conservatives set up in order to do commissioning, which was to sell off bits of the NHS. And but the right wing are saying, look at what Starmer's doing. He's destroying it. It's being used as a wind up, when in fact it's a wonderful example of there being adults back in the room, winding back some of the craziness. But the crazies are unable to avoid using every possible opportunity to take pot shots. And we have to be a little bit mature and steady through this. Otherwise, we won't, dig ourselves out of the fear and hatred and into this better future. And I'm encouraged that yesterday I found one tree that was being well looked after, and I think it is possible. It is possible. And once it's been done, it's very visible, and it sets an example for, before it was just, a harborside that was looking a bit scruffy. Now,
And you trip over it, for God's sake.
Well, it was on the cobbles, but yeah, whatever. Yes, you always have to be careful when walking on cobbles, is what I would say to that. But
All pavements.
Yes, it's been beautiful. It's been beautified, and that one example, so gives a little heads up. So it would be nice if we could come through this. And I once stood as a candidate for the Natural Law Party in 1992 or something like that. And a lot of the ideas there was to go beyond politics and to have to eliminate political parties, as you said, and to have local groups working with their MPs around what policies they wanted in their area, and then choosing the person who they thought would be their best representative to send to Westminster, not somebody from a party political slate following a particular national agenda. A lot of my friends say, "Dream on, David." But
did the Natural Law Party come out of the Transcendental Meditation movement?
Yes, it did, and they're now promoting. I saw this lovely. There's a guy busking in Shenzhen who I saw on TikTok, and he was singing a song called "Consciousness is All There Is," and he was talking about we were 10,000 strong. He's talking about big groups of meditators, and it's this blues looper in Shenzhen singing this song about consciousness is all there is. And I thought, great,
What's Shenzhen?
Shenzhen is one of the great. It's a great high-tech city in China.
All right.
So he was.
How do you spell that then? How come I it's not in my consciousness? I don't know. I don't recognize it.
Shenzhen, but I'll look it up. It's something
Two
like,
words or one?
it may even be a province. No, it's one word.
Oh. Interesting. As they used to say.
I spelt it right. Shenzhen. Population of 17.5 million. So China's got loads of cities that are bigger than anything in Europe that you haven't even heard of.
Yeah.
Amazing. That's what population gets you.
Yeah, and some of those cities have such good policies too. I worked in Guangzhou quite a lot, and the university was opposite this most amazing, beautiful, wonderful park. And I used to walk there, and they had a cafe which had wonderful, it was civilized. I worked at UE for a long time. I would not say the environments of UE, the physical, geographical environments, anything but uncivilized.
Yeah.
They have space to be civilized, and in some parts they're very civilized.
Yes. And they all slightly subservient to a kind of government that limits individual freedoms. And so but the population are very alert, mature people mostly, and they survived terrible massacres during the Cultural Revolution and so on.
A long time ago. I'm actually smiling and disagreeing with you, because you should hear some of my students. They know how to keep an inscrutable face, and then they write me essays, 5,000-word essays that show they are revolutionaries. But they are going to get it done in a way that is completely conducive of the situation they're in.
That's exactly what I was saying, Angela. That's what I meant.
When I was ill one time, this might sound very irrelevant, but just to back up what Angela said from a very distant perspective, I saw a video of a dog that was really good at skateboarding, and I love following things from Google Earth. And all I knew about this dog is that an article had appeared in the South China News, and he was skateboarding around a large lake, and the lake had features like an awful flyover going over the middle of it. But what I noticed was that in the West, this skateboarding dog would have never got going in the same way because their parks seem so peaceful and they seem to have roads which are for sort of low energy motorbikes and pedestrians, and cars are on completely different roads. And in the West, somebody would have run over Cabbage, as his name was, his Pak Choi or whatever. But he used to be able to go all around, all over places on his skateboard with his owner, who was behind him on his skateboard. And the peace and the serenity of those parks, it really struck me how there was a vibe which allowed thought. Maybe publicly people don't disagree in front of the government, but it felt there was a sort of mental space and a physical space that we lost in the West with the intrusion of so many bits of machinery and so many people doing so many diverse things that it's a battering compared to the peace of those parks. That's what struck me.
Patty?
Yeah. Just a note, when I chose my medical school in London, because in Cambridge you did the undergraduate bit and then you had to go and find a medical school to do your clinical work. I chose King's College Hospital because there was a park next to it.
Mm.
It was a huge influencer.
Yeah, it makes such a difference, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Well,
two other things I want to mention, if you don't mind. One is the idea of I can't put it very well, but just to paraphrase it, spend money on communal luxuries and less on individuals. That's not really how it was said, but invest in communal luxuries so that you can have a quality of life. Second thought I have is the idea of culture, different cultures, because our culture is going so individualistic, and yet we have quite a lot of people within the UK who come from cultures which are collective. And yes, there is control needed in collective cultures. And in order for you to get on as big families and communities. But the going for individualism and building more houses for individual people to live alone, and I don't think human nature is about living alone, really. So just throwing these ideas into the pot, sad, yeah.
no, I agree with you. I mean, there'll always be some people that want to live as hermits, but the vast rest of us, I think, are better with some sort of collective, I don't know, are working together for something for the good of all. And that is why I found it was so distressing that in these anti-COVID measures, there was this message of don't be fooled into doing things for the good of the community. That's an abuse of your freedom, which is the opposite of what you're saying, because it's so communal cultures are so much more healthy in many ways that we're losing with the individualistic culture. Because I suppose it's a balance, isn't it? People need to be able to be free to be who they are, but they need to be within a culture which cares about the whole community and ultimately the whole planet, not just selfish acquisition of more and more profit.
My brother tells a story of the fact that he married a Asian lady.
Ah,
A lovely lady she is too. I get on very well with her, but that's an aside. And he said that when she first came to England, and she saw that there were old people's homes, and she said, why? And Roy said, explained that. She said, but in my country, we don't have that. When if old people, they live with the family. The houses and explain houses are bigger over there, type of thing. We've got flats and tower big flats and all this type of stuff. But she was quite surprised and a little upset that we farmed out our old people to other places. We didn't have them as part of our home, as part of our community type of thing. And I thought it was a lovely idea. But I don't think any of my relatives would like me living with them.
That's sad that you think that, Ray.
Sorry?
It's sad that you think that.
You haven't met my family.
Oh, well, that's a different side to it.
Yes, it is. Yeah. But I agree with you. It is a sad situation if we have that. But a lot of families can't say they can't afford a bigger house to have mum or dad there as well. So it's what we're building. It's what we are happy to live with. That type of thing. I would like to live in a community, and my friend David and I have discussed this type of thing because we would both like to live in communities.
Yeah.
But we can't afford it.
Yeah, well, that takes you down also. We can. It's completely affordable. We're an incredibly wealthy society, but the wealth is being concentrated at one particular end of it. What we've got, we have this sort of left against right, and it's actually top against bottom. The game's being run from up here, and as long as the political issues aren't the point. As long as people are divided and fighting, doesn't matter what they're divided and fighting over, that allows a small number to maintain their position of privilege over the rest of us.
Good old Mr. Maslow.
Yeah, well, if we matured enough, then we could, a society based on happiness and exploring our higher potential is perfectly possible. But at the moment, it looks a bit remote. But at the same time, there are these little seeds coming up. One tree that's being looked after, one set of council houses in Hackney that are going to all get solar power for free, and one group of 10,000 people meditating for peace, but a number more being established. So if those trends, if we're horrified enough, there's a principle in warfare of never fighting all your enemies at once. What would be slightly worse than that would be doing your damnedest to turn all your friends into enemies at the same time.
You're referring to an orange politician.
I'm referring to somebody who another friend of mine calls Carrot. Yeah, and that would be such a silly thing to do. And somebody else said, saying, why should we come and look after you guys? Why would NATO ever do that? And they said, you don't remember what happened with 9/11?
Yeah.
America was attacked and everybody rallied round. And now you're standing up and saying you wouldn't help anybody. Short memories. And I think a lot of Americans will be, there's a chance of bringing people back to that memory.
But I feel a lot of the root of this is the rise of business culture to the detriment of all other ethics and religions.
Yeah.
And this is pinnacleized in a way. Sorry, my use of language isn't very good. By what's happening in America. I mean, that's kind of what I was saying with Thatcher replaced a lot of our culture with business culture. And that's brought a lot of the problems we have now. Things like Grenfell Tower. Suddenly, the buildings inspectorate was privatised. So nobody was accountable to anything but another business. So Kingspan, the maker of those cladding, had lied, and the private buildings inspectorate, the privatised, was also another building company. And they didn't have the clout because Kingspan said, we'll sue you. So this gradual replacement of all our, well, it's just like the utility companies. They no longer serve citizens, they serve the shareholder. And I often think, in history, it will be written that the West lost its soul to capitalism. And I feel that is what is happening, that the capitalisation of every little thing. I remember one point in the 90s, I went to the vet and my cat's medicine had increased from £2 to £20 overnight. And I said, can you just check somebody's put the decimal point in the right place? And in any other moment in the rest of my life, the receptionist would have said, oh, yes, that does seem a bit odd. I'll just go and check. But her answer in Thatcher's world was so revealing. She said, oh, don't you think our prices are competitive? And in that innocent comment, I realised the whole atmosphere of a fair product for a fair wage, for fairness, was completely out of the window, and screw anything for whatever profit you can make. And this is a lot of the story about what's happening in America at the moment, I think.
No such thing as society, darling.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
We all live in our separate little boxes.
That's the point. That was the turning point. Was when, the neo, whatever they're called, neocons or neoliberals or whatever it was, decided to capitalize the society. But I was in America when a meditation group grew to a certain size, and Gorbachev dismantled communism. And I said, when the number of people meditating together is large enough, then America will find itself without an enemy. And the comment after that happened was, yes, but capitalism and communism are two extremes of the same thing, materialism. And materialism is opposed to spirituality. So there's this sort of deeper shift that needs to come. It isn't. It's about tipping society to a point where the spiritual values are valued most highly, and then all the other diverse values will be appreciated as diverse, as opposed to opposed and in conflict.
Yeah, it's like when they always used to do which countries were the best places to live in just by rate of pay rather than rate of well-being.
Yeah.
And now it's much more accepted that it should be a rate of well-being on a broader spectrum than just the financial spectrum.
I'm going to have to leave, I think.
Well, it's time.
Wonderful
Yes,
talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have come to that time now, folks, where lunch is calling.
Right.
And it has been wonderful for you two friends to have brought this to us this morning. And I think we've had a spectrum of views. We may disagree with some, we may with me, I suppose it will be medicine. Alternative medicine versus conventional medicine versus, all this lot. That fascinating subject. Hattie, you wanted to say something before
Can I just
we go?
ask you what title you gave to your talk in the end?
I think it was in democracy, something about, is democracy still possible in an era of fake news algorithms or something like that. I just wanted to say I'm not anti-natural medicine, by the way. I was anti the use of followers of natural medicine to be sucked into the far right agenda. It's a balance. Like most things, there's a balance. Yeah.
David, we'll have to call your talk something.
Oh, I see. Right. Well, didn't you write it down?
Well,
You did change the title a few times.
I did a short version on the notices, so I could.
We could have a can democracy withstand the pressures of social media manipulation?
Can democracy survive?
Yeah, can democracy survive?
Right. Lovely.
And next week, dear friends, we have David Moat.
Oh,
yeah.
How do we love our enemies? An
How do we
introduction. Pardon me?
say it again, please?
How do we love our enemies?
Oh, yeah.
An introduction to a reconciliation laboratory for would-be facilitators.
Good enough. Great.
Sounds good.
Great.
Take that away and conjure with it. Anyway, folks, that's very nice seeing you this morning.
thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Yeah,
Go well.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Patsy.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye then. Bye bye.
Thank you.